Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Let's continue the story about my research related to Bob Dylan's visit to Moscow and Tbilisi in 1985. So, as I remember, in the first part we have stopped on the video or film which was recorded during the poetry evening in Moscow, and my efforts to find it. So how do I know that, how do I know that how did I know, sorry for my English, that this video exists? Well, as you remember, I have mentioned two persons who helped me very much in my research: Zurab from Tbilisi and James from California. And both of them, in their memories, have mentioned this film. The film was recorded by Soviet TV during the poetry evening. Zurab said that he had a copy of this movie on the old videotape, but he lost it, and his video recorder was broken. James remembered that his relatives in Slovakia, Slovakia at that time was the part of the, how to say it, of the world of socialistic countries in Europe. I don't know what is the official name of that. Anyway, they saw him on the stage in Moscow in some TV program which was broadcasted from USSR. Of course, that was very interesting, and it proved that this film really exists. And I searched the internet, and I didn't find anything, not a minute of that video, not a picture from that video. So really, I would never believe it exists if I wouldn't have the memories of those two respected persons. So finally, I found it. I found it in one of Russian archives, and now I have it in my collection. I bought the right to have it, but unfortunately, I cannot show it. I cannot show it in my channel because I bought it only for the home use, and I am not planning to violate the rule. If I show you that movie, it will be very much visible that this is that it belongs to one of Russian TV organizations. So that was only an excellent material to do the research. The poetry evening lasted for about 3-4 hours, but the film is just 1.5 hours long. So all participants' readings have been shortened. For example, Bob Dylan sings just one song instead of three. But still, it is a great source of information about the event. And I was able to identify all participants of it. That is important to know. I keep on drawing parallels. Remember Live Aid. Dylan shared the stage with Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, Lionel Richie, Bruce Springsteen, Tina Turner, Diana Ross, Paul Simon, and who was there at the poetry evening? Now I know them all and described each person in my future book. Now with the film in my collection and James, Regan and Zurab on my side, I was able to investigate next issues. For example, who has invited Dylan to the USSR and why? Remember, it was the peak of the Cold War, and cultural contacts between two countries were rather weak. According to the media, Dylan was invited by Soviet poets Evgeny Yevtushenko and Andrei Voznesensky. Now I know that it was Yevtushenko alone. Many questions immediately arise regarding this matter. How did he invite Dylan? Did he send an official letter or made a phone call? Or maybe it was a personal meeting somewhere. Did they know each other well by that time? Just few words about Evgeny Yevtushenko and Andrei Voznesensky. They were extremely popular poets in USSR and very well known in other countries. In Soviet Union, they were reading poems at stadiums, gathering thousands of people like popular music stars now. Yevtushenko was part of the world cultural elite, and his stories about meetings, trips, and conversations with most famous politicians, movie stars, athletes, and musicians in the world are the reality of his life. Here are two examples of his world fame. On April 13, 1962, the American magazine Time has placed a portrait of the Soviet poet on its cover. It was the illustration of the article called Russia, the Pursuit of Truth, about the new generation of residents of the USSR during the relative flourishing of freedoms in 1960s. Yevtushenko, who was 28 years old, referred to the article as Zhenya, the short version of his name Evgeny, was seen as one of the symbols of his generation. What a striking resemblance to Bob Dylan, heralded as the voice of his generation in the United States. In fact, they were of the same generation. Yevtushenko was only 8 years older than Dylan. One more example. In the issue of the New York Times of October 28, 1963, the American critic Robert Sheldon compared the young Bob Dylan with Yevtushenko. It's a quote. Perhaps an American Yevtushenko, the Russian poet. That is, not Yevtushenko like Dylan, but Dylan is an American Yevtushenko. And of course, you know the Robert Shelton and the big role which he played in Bob Dylan's musical career. As for Andrei Voznesensky, he was a celebrity too. In his book of memoirs on the virtual wind, he mentioned his photograph published in the Time magazine. with the caption, "The greatest living poet of his country." He has not indicated what year was it, but then the poet wrote about a meeting with US President Ronald Reagan. So probably it was something like 1987. The funny thing, by the way, do you know that during his first tour in the United States, Andrei Voznесensky performed on the same stage with a group, Jefferson Airplane. Yes, that happened on April 7, 1966 in San Francisco at the Fillmore Auditorium. Both Yevtushenko and Voznесensky spoke some English, so they could communicate with presidents, poets, and other celebrities without translators. Soviet poets established friendly relations with some of celebrities, for example, with the American poet Allen Ginsberg. This suggests a conclusion. Ginsberg could easily introduce Yevtushenko or Voznесensky to Dylan, or act as an intermediary in inviting Dylan to the USSR. But yes and no, there was an intermediary, but a different one. It was James Reagan, who was Yevtushenko's friend by that time, and he passed the invitation to Dylan's manager. So Bob Dylan was invited, and the invitation was accepted. Why? As you know, during his life, Bob Dylan has rejected many honorable invitations. So there should be a really serious reason for him to agree to visit USSR, or maybe a number of reasons. Well, one of them was described to me by James Reagan. In one of his letters, he wrote that both Dylan and himself saw the Poetry Festival invitation as an opportunity to act as goodwill ambassadors. James mentioned that it was 1985, the height of the Cold War, but Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, already announced the policy of perestroika and openness, glasnost. And Yevtushenko told James Reagan that it was Gorbachev himself who encouraged him and the USSR Writers' Union to invite Americans to perform along with Russian and other foreign poets in Moscow at their International Poetry Festival. So we can say that Bob Dylan was invited by Gorby, by Mikhail Gorbachev. Definitely, struggle for peace could be one of the reasons. Another one could be Dylan's desire to visit Odessa, the town where Bob's ancestors were born. In 1985, Odessa was part of the USSR, located relatively close to Tbilisi, where American poets were intended to come. Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, had and has a rather long Black Sea coastline, and Odessa is a big port at the Black Sea too. And I'm sure during that time there was a boat line between those cities, which Bob could use. And of course there was an airplane connection between those two big cities. And the third motif could be rather personal, and it requires some prehistory explanation. Here I need to mention the name of Valery Pisigin. Valery Pisigin is the author of the essays on Anglo-American music of the 50s and 60s of the 20th century in 5 volumes, and he wrote another 5 volumes of The Coming of the Blues, the greatest authority on American blues and folk music history I know. I had a chance to meet Valery, and he told me about his meeting with Izzy Young, the owner of the Folklore Center in Greenwich Village, New York. If you have ever read the Bob Dylan's memoir book, Chronicles, you would know what role Izzy played in Bob's life. Izzy told Valery that once he met Dylan in 2003 in Stockholm. Dylan was performing there, and Izzy ran his folklore center, which was moved from New York to Sweden. And they had a nice talk. And Bob said, now it's a quote, "I would like to go somewhere. I am bored of being where I live. Not interesting." Izzy Young explained this phrase to Valery this way. Bob has a house in London where he is not interested in going. He has a house in New York and he is also bored there and wants to live. He has a farm in Minnesota, but he is tired of it too. He is trying to get away. He has a house somewhere in California, but boredom sets in there too. So he lives in 5 different places, and everywhere there is only boredom and boredom. I think that in 1985, when Dylan was already 44 years old, boredom was starting to set in. And then suddenly he got a chance to go to the Soviet Union. Isn't it interesting? After all, neither him nor James Reagan nor Robert Bly had been to the USSR before. Soon after my success with getting the copy of the Poetry Evening video, the fate smiled on me again. I speak about one of the most remarkable finds made during my research. 2 protocols which I got in one of the archives in Moscow. Protocols provide the details of how the poetry evening was organized and describe in details the financial and other terms of inviting guests of honor from abroad and their stay in the USSR. Here I want to cite some small paragraph. It is decided to invite 12 foreign writers with their wives to participate in the festival for a period of 10 days as honored guests of the festival, paying all expenses for their stay in the USSR and foreign exchange expenses for travel from their place of residence to Moscow and back. Saying festival, they mean the Festival of Youth, which was starting the day after the poetry evening. So Bob Dylan was in that list, and he has received some amount of rubles from Soviet government as other members of the group. Other terms were related to the organization of the tour to Tbilisi, holding of a gala dinner, and so on. Protocols also contain the complete list of the participants of the World Poetry Evening, or as it were called in the documents, the Feast of International Poetry. Also, those documents clearly states that all foreign writers, participants of the International Poetry Festival, were VIP guests of the World Festival of Youth and Students, which has started the next day after the poetry evening. It was also said that the Central Committee of the USSR Komsomol is responsible for their stay in the country. Actually, I have never thought before that Bob Dylan was in such good and close relations with the Komsomol, the Union of Young Soviet Communists. It's a joke, or kind of joke. Returning back to the video, thanks to it, I have a very detailed description of the poetry evening in which Bob Dylan participated, the date and place of the event, the list of participants, the list of poems which they read. I know how many spectators were there, how did they react, and also I have some comment of one eyewitness which I found. So, speaking about Dylan performance, prior to it, the host of the evening, Evgeny Yevtushenko, has read to the audience his own translation of the Bob's world-famous masterpiece, Blowing in the Wind. Yevtushenko's poetry was called How Many Roads. After that, Evgeny stood up and declared, "Poet and the favorite singer of American youth, Bob Dylan." And here he came. He sang 3 songs. So the first one was Blowing in the Wind. Then experts agree that Dylan sang A Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall as the second song and disagree on the final one. The prevailing opinion is that it was the times they are changing, but some believe that it was It's Alright Ma, I'm Only Bleeding. Whatever it was, the first ever performance of the rock music icon, singer and poet Bob Dylan in the USSR has ended there. But not the adventures. When the poetry evening was over, Andrei Voznесensky, who also participated in the event, invited Bob Dylan to his country house outside of Moscow in the poets' village of Peredelkino. This is a well-known fact, and most Russian and international articles of all types and formats describe this like this. Bob Dylan came to the USSR for an International Youth and Student Festival. His performance didn't go well. The Soviet public didn't understand or hear him. He got very upset, and Andrei Voznесensky took him to his dacha, the Russian word for the country house, in Peredelkino. There, the singer suffered and grieved while the Soviet poet served him tea. In some versions, it's not a tea but brandy, and tried to comfort him. As you can see, the evening at Voznесensky Place at Peredelkino occupies an important place in this story. The fact that 3 of 5 photographs related to Dylan's stay in the USSR, which are available in internet, were taken at Voznесensky's house shows the importance of the event. It's hard to imagine. Bob Dylan was in USSR for 2 weeks, and there is no more than 5 photographs which are related to that period of his life. I cannot understand that. I'm sure there are somewhere in some people's archives, so of course it would be great to find them. But speaking about the photographs taken in Andrei Voznесensky house, their author was the well-known Soviet and Russia photographer Sergei Borisov, whom I later succeeded to find and interview about the details of that photographic session. To my great regret, Sergei was the only eyewitness of the meeting in Peredelkino I've been able to talk to. I have tried to contact Andrei Voznесensky's wife, Zoya Boguslavskaya, several times, but no luck. I did manage to enter into dialogue with the Voznесensky Center, established by Zoya Boguslavskaya and Leonid Boguslavsky, her son, in the memory of Andrei. The center's director, Olga Vertseva, appreciated my efforts to gather materials for the research and the book, and was willing to give 99-year-old Zoya Boguslavskaya my list of 40 questions about absolutely all possible details of how the meeting was held. But age is age. I have not received a reply yet. By the way, one of my questions to Zoya Boguslavskaya was about her and Andrei's meeting with John Baez. You definitely know about her and Bob's close relations. In one of winter days of 1978, so 7 years before Bob Dylan's visit, Joanne appeared in Moscow with 2 companions. It was her private visit. No any concerts were scheduled. All that was related to one of the most mystical and concerts which were planned to happen on the same year, 1978, in Leningrad, on the Dvorcovaya Palace, so the main palace of the city in front of the world-famous museum Hermitage. And that concert was planned to have the biggest names of American rock and pop music, like John Baez, Beach Boys, Santana, and stars of Russian pop music. But such a fantastic event was cancelled a few days before the date. But so John decided to come just as a private person in the winter of the same year. The Voznесensky's couple was Joanne's friends, and they invited her to Peredelkino. Again, Peredelkino. See how the paths of Bob Dylan and John Baez intersect even in Russia. Andrei and Zoya offered to organize Joanne's concert in a countryside restaurant nearby. I assume that it was the Arkhangelskaya restaurant, where the cultural, economic, and shadow elite of the Soviet capital regularly gathered together for night parties. The gig took place, but it went not as it was planned. Jan didn't want to sing for a rather limited group of Moscow cultural elite, sitting in a small hall upstairs, saying that she used to perform for the masses, for the people. The masses were found in a big restaurant hall downstairs, and they got a unique opportunity to listen to world-famous Jan Baez for free, singing for them in the night somewhere in the woods nearby Moscow. Just to mention, those masses were represented mainly by the Soviet dark economy rustlers, lightly dissolved with famous people like sportsmen and scientists. Okay, back to Bob Dylan. The next day after the poetry evening and the evening at Vosnesensky's house, the next day after poetry evening and evening at Vosnesensky house, the 12th World Festival of Youth and Students has started. Its events were happening everywhere. The whole city of Moscow was its venue. What happened in Moscow during the festival? Which of its events could Bob Dylan have attended? I do not have a complete answer, but have found an eyewitness who was attending one of the meetings of the Soviet youth with Dylan and have interviewed him. I also made a list of Dylan-related places in Moscow and is ready to publish a Bob Dylan's Moscow guide. Actually, the same thing can be done for Tbilisi locations. As a result of my investigation, I am able to add yet unknown details to the only mention of Bob Dylan's visit to Russia in his memoir book Chronicles. Do you remember? He speaks there about Leo Tolstoy and a visit to his mansion, noting that he rode a Tolstoy bicycle there. Absolutely all researchers are sure that Bob, speaking about Yasnaya Polyana, the most known mention of famous Russian writer Lev Tolstoy. No, it is not. It's a mistake. Yasnaya Polyana is 200 kilometers away from Moscow. It would be too long trip for the group of foreign poets. And there is no any historical bicycle there. So those things happened in other place, much closer to Moscow. And my next research was related to a photo showing a group of people standing somewhere in downtown Moscow. Its copy is in James Reagan Home Archive. This photo features James Reagan himself, Robert Bly with his wife, and Seamus Heaney, another participant of the poetry evening, the winner of the 1995 Nobel Prize in Literature. And Dylan is there too with a lady. So, by the way, we have two Nobel Prize in Literature winners at the same picture. This photo boosted me to find answers to new questions. Where are they standing and who is the lady? As for the location, James Reagan could not give me an exact answer. Then I have addressed to His Majesty Facebook and published this picture there with a question, where is it taken? I was surprised with the activity which I have started. I got a correct answer as a result of huge 3 days discussions in comments under the picture. As for the lady, she is shown there from the side. The same lady can be found at the picture taken at the Andrei Vosnesensky house in Peredelkino, where she is shown from the back. So it is rather hard to identify her. Nevertheless, I have found who she is. And the last but not the least question. Somebody may ask, why great rock singer Bob Dylan didn't meet Soviet rock musicians? There were many good ones there. And in 1985, American singer Jana Stingray was already preparing the release of the legendary double LP called Red Wave, 4 underground bands from the Soviet Union, which hit the US market in 1986, the next year. Yes, there was an attempt to arrange such a meeting, but it was unsuccessful. All details are in the book as usual. So, enough for Moscow, and in the next part, which will be the final part, I believe, I will tell you about Bob Dylan's trip to the Republic of Georgia and to its capital, Tbilisi. So, please subscribe, write comments, and see you soon at my channel. Thank you very much.